Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Writing Community Chat show. I love coming back to these live shows, and even though season 8 has kind of ticked on a couple of shows now, it's still fantastic to be back. Having Max Brooks on a few weeks ago was absolutely outstanding, and Brian Collins last week was very insightful when it comes to things like SEO and things I don't really know too much about. So if you haven't checked that out, I suggest you do so. If in the same kind of mind space as I am when it comes to marketing, I haven't really got a clue. So tonight's guest is another fantastic guest, and there's a lot of stories I'm imagining that is going to be talked about, especially if you're going to check out this person's website, which you can do if you check out the description of the show, and I'll put it in the notes as well. It's well worth doing so, especially as the show's on. Why not do it now? If you're watching this live, that must mean that tomorrow is Friday, and that's a fantastic day of the week that we all love. It's also nice to note that the days are getting lighter towards the end of the day, which is lovely. That means summer's definitely on its way. Just before we do get the show off and started, I would like to thank a few people in general for raising some money for me for the frontline walk that I'm doing in October. There's plenty of details on the Twitter account, which is quite a funny story at the moment. And especially Julie Kuzma, who sponsored me quite a large sum of money. So thank you very much for that. And it is helping towards the donation process. There is a target to hit, and I'm going steadily towards that as my training is steadily increasing in miles too. The Twitter page, unfortunately, at the moment is locked out, thanks to Twitter, not to Twitter, but the security measures, which I'm grateful for. So I'm currently locked out of there. Let's see who's on the chat. Hello to Halo Scott. Nice to see you in. Joe Paulson made it. Hello, darling, she says. Lime. Oh my God, how many times have I got that name wrong? I apologize. Leah is in the house as well. Hello to Connor. It's nice to see you all in the chat. It's fantastic. And again, I love the chat when you guys are going off on your tangents. It really does entertain me in the show, which you shouldn't do, but I like it. So let's get to tonight's guest on. You've probably heard enough of me rambling. Tonight's guest is somebody that is a Sunday Times best-selling author who is also known by a pseudonym. Her name is Tasmina Perry, but she's also known as J.L.Butler. Her debut thriller as J.L.Butler has been optioned by Sony Pictures and is in development with original film. Tasmina has released 13 books, becoming a Sunday Times bestseller, and her novels have been translated into over 20 languages and has sold over 2 million copies, which is absolutely fantastic. As J.L.Butler, she released Mine, as mentioned previously, has been optioned, and it's been called well crafted by the Wall Street Journal, and Heat magazine said that it's a tightly plotted novel. This tightly plotted novel is a gut-twisting must. So it does sound absolutely fantastic, and there's plenty of books in there to talk about. There'll be plenty of writing experience to talk about, and I can't wait to get her on the show. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tasmina. Tasmina, thank you so much for joining me. And despite my stumbling into that introduction, it's a real pleasure to have you here. How are you doing?
Great. No, you're right about the days getting longer, because my husband's a writer as well, and we have worked from home for 15 years. And while the whole world seems to move to a work from home model, we've actually gone the other way, and we've just got an office about 20 minutes walk from our house.
No way.
We leave the office at about 4:30, and even before Christmas it was pitch black, and our office had loads of twinkly lights. It was gorgeous. It's a bit like Wham's last Christmas video, but now it's sort of light, and you do actually. I'm a Leo. I'm not really into star signs, but I'm definitely a bit solar powered. So I'm really glad it's not dark anymore when you come home from work.
I really think it affects everybody's mood, and people feel happier and better and more energetic, when the sun comes out. And of course, you get to have barbecues and nice summery things as well. So I think most of us are looking forward to a good summer this year.
But we got a trolley for the office, so I'm looking forward to welcoming people. And actually, do you know what? I was staring out of the window today, and who should walk past but Jacqueline Wilson walking her dog. Wow. So I was like, I was this far away from going, Jacqueline, do you want to come in for an author chat? But she looked busy.
Wow, that's fantastic. I like the idea of a drink trolley, nonetheless. That really does. It should go hand in hand with being a writer, I think. Or is that the stereotype?
It's the writer's fantasy.
Yeah, it is. Writing in the cafe is still one of those things I've not yet to experience. So maybe one day this year we'll have a look.
Do you know what? I've never been able to do that. I know lots of writers, you know, Lisa Julb's a friend, she writes in cafes often. It's just something I've never been able to do. I get quite distracted by noise and people. I know lots of writers enjoy the people watching aspect, but I'm one of these. I literally can't have any music. Although I have actually over lockdown enjoyed listening to a classical background. That's worked. But, you know, again, my husband can sort of listen to like really sort of hard rock in the background. It's like, whoa, that's not me.
No, I've dabbled in this quite a lot, and I used to have the same playlist over and over. So it was known but not distracting. That turned into sounds of wind and rain and all these sorts of things, which is quite cool. Now, interestingly, as you said that, I have moved into the world of classical or nice soft music or piano music for writing. And so it's weird how that changes. And I agree with you 100%. Anything distracting or loud, I can't do that. Connor says, I love Jacqueline. I love her work. I use it in schools all the time. So that's interesting. And Joanne says, I'm so very Virgo.
So Virgo. I wish I'm not Virgo at all, but I'm going to channel my inner Virgo because they're about detail and organization. I've just treated myself to 3 whiteboards.
Wow.
And actually that's been great because getting the office has brought a whole different dynamic for me. So I'm a really heavy plotter with my novels, and usually I use record cards a lot. You know that you sort of used to use revision. I use record cards, but now I've actually got a personal space to do it. I've got a huge pinboard. I've got 3 whiteboards. And so, channeling my inner Virgo, I've been really, really quite anal about the detail and the plotting, and actually just sort of surrounding myself. Like it almost feels like immersion. So, I've enjoyed. Yeah, they've been the perks, I think. You know, obviously I don't like paying the check at the end of the month. Oh, maybe I should just work at the kitchen table. But I think having that psychological barrier between home and work has been really helpful for me.
I imagine there's a lot of people in the same situation here through lockdown have had to work from home as well and write from home and just be in their home so much that where writing may have been a little escape in the house at times became something that was too common or too known. So having that office space may be a real sort of official escape within a natural setting. So I think it could be a real nice difference there.
And also a friend, actually, you know, having that space, that neutral space. A friend came round this afternoon who used to be a senior journalist. She's left now, but she's great on the PR and the marketing side. And she just came round and we got loads of biscuits and tea, and we just had a really great brainstorm for 2 or 3 hours. And I think a lot of the time when you're a writer, it's, you know, if you tell people you're a writer, it's very boho, it's very artistic, it's very creative. But I think more and more it's actually a business. And I think you know, more and more we need to grasp the idea that it is a commercial enterprise at the end of the day, you know, unless you're sort of doing it for the soul and for the art, you know, that's one way to do it. But if you're doing this to make money and to earn a living, it's a business. And so I think it's really important to brainstorm with lots of people who perhaps have loads of commercial experience and, you know, can help. You know, I didn't even realize that TikTok marketing was a thing until, you know, aforementioned friend talked to me about it today. So, you know, even if you haven't got an office, I'd definitely put aside, you know, an afternoon a month where you can just go and brainstorm with fellow writers or people who are in sort of disciplines that could be helpful to you.
Absolutely. We discovered in the little community that revolves around this show, TikTok, 1 or 2 of the authors have used it effectively and it does work. So the social media platforms, there's a lot of them these days, but there is. They take up a lot of time as well. So there's finding that balance, which is fantastic. But definitely try things out, isn't it? I mean, there's no point not trying it because you never know what might work very well.
Absolutely.
Tasmina, what we're going to do is I'm going to play a little video and then we're going to go into the first section of the show, which is all about how you arrived at where you are now. So it's called The Road to Writing. And then we'll get into it. So let's rewind the tape.
By the way,
What's that? Sorry.
I love that video.
Thank
We
you
need
very
a
much.
disco ball. We need a disco ball for that video.
I'll definitely put a disco ball into one of them for the next show, just for you. Weirdly, it's very nostalgic, because back when this show first started, just audio based, that was the very first segment of audio that was basically part of the show, and it was also the introduction. So I had to keep it in there for the video. So every time it takes me back there, it's weird. So let's find out then. Let's rewind the tape and find out how you got into writing, because I know there's quite a good journey there, and there's definitely some stories in there.
Yeah, there's lots of stories.
Yeah. So let us know, where did it all start from?
Far away. So I was just a normal girl from Manchester, and you asked my mum, and I was always writing. I was that kid. I'm sure loads of authors say this, but I was. Probably should have done an English degree, but before I knew it, I was doing a law degree. And then before I knew it, I was at law school, and I had my traineeship all settled and ready to go. Well, that's a really hard thing to turn your back on. I actually remember going to see the career service at university and going, I want to be a journalist. So the writing thing was definitely there from an early age. And they were telling me, oh, you've got to go and do the local rag circuit and cover jumble sales and this, that, and the other. And just all sounded a really long, difficult process. So I went to law school, and my holiday job, and this is a good story, my holiday job, and it also gives away my age, so I might gloss over some of the details. My holiday job was at Granada Studios Tour, which at the time was almost a theme park, sort of wrapped around the Coronation Street set.
Wow.
And I reached the dizzy heights of working in the hot dog caravan. And I made a mean hot dog. And one day, me and my friend were in the van, and these guys came and they were dancing in front of our van. We call them red shoes, because they were wearing red shoes rather imaginatively. And I was like, oh, they're really talented, really handsome, they're great. Thought nothing of it until about 2 weeks later. I was in a cafe in Manchester, and I saw red shoes, and I thought, do you know what? I'm looking back, and I tell people this story, and they're like, why did you go over and talk to them? And to this day, I don't really know. But I did go up to them and say, listen, I am about to, start my law traineeship, but I want to be a journalist. But to be a journalist, I know you need a portfolio, and I think you're great. Can I interview you? And the guy who I was nearest to said, yeah. Shook my hand. Hi, my name's Rob. Sit down. And it was Robbie Williams. And it was Take That. And I probably did their first ever interview, because they hadn't even done a proper gig. They danced on the Granada Studios Tour forecourt, but they hadn't done their first proper gig. And they invited me to their first proper gig, which was at Flick's Discotheque in Huddersfield.
Wow.
And that was it. And do you know what? So began and ended the story, or so I thought. Then I went to do my training, and not long afterwards, I actually won a competition in a magazine, and it was win a date with 2 male models. and again, and you had to write why you should win. And I wrote kind of this comedy quiz, and I won. And I went down and met the male models, who were great. You can tell the mind of the 23-year-old where my priorities were at that point. So handsome young men. And but I got there, and something clicked. And actually, I was more interested in seeing how putting together a feature actually worked, because the competition was a feature, and there was a photographer there, and the magazine journalist was there. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is absolutely what I want to do. So I used to take time off from the law firm, and, say I was going on holiday, and actually I used to go down to London and do work experience at the magazine. And I got some quite basic level experience. 2 years later, so I'm now 25 at this point, and I've just qualified as a lawyer, and the editor of It Was More magazine phoned me up and said, listen, you're either a lunatic or very dedicated. I know you've just qualified, but a job has just come up as a junior writer.
Wow.
Would you be interested? The only snag is you still do need a portfolio to go for the job. And I know you haven't really been doing lots of, the sort of work I was doing was opening envelopes. And I was like, well, wait a minute. And I produced the Take That interview. In the 2-year intervening years, they'd become huge.
Yeah.
And so I got the job. And, I became an editor quite quickly because, as I say, something just clicked. And I knew I'd found my calling, I'd found my passion. And that was it. So I was a journalist for 10 really, really happy years, actually. I loved it until I got married. And I was actually, and at the back of my mind, so I'm sort of 34 by this point, just about to get married, looking around. I was deputy editor of InStyle magazine, which was a fashion magazine at this point, and looking around and thinking, oh, it's quite an ageist profession, this. Where do women go over 40? And already there was somebody in my office called Polly Williams, who is quite a successful writer. As Polly Williams, she's now Eve Chase, really successful. And she'd got an agent about 6 months before me, and I knew she was writing a book. And so we sort of got into this, oh, you've got an agent. And I thought, oh, I'm never going to get an agent. And then she got book deal. And I'm like, oh, I'm never going to get a book deal. But that was it. So both of us, actually, we left InStyle within quite a short period of time with each other, having got these great book deals, because I actually wrote I started my novel on honeymoon. I actually went to the bookshop at Heathrow, and I remember thinking, right, I want a beach read, but I'd read everything Jackie Collins had written, everything Jilly Cooper had written, and so I thought, right, what should I do? And there was actually the book I did buy for the honeymoon was a biography of the Mitford sisters, and I remember reading it thinking, wow, this is great. What would a bunch of sort of controversial sisters be like today? And that became my idea, Daddy's Girls, which went into the top 10 and was a hit from the get-go. So yeah, that is my story. And then so when it did go into the top 10, that gave me the confidence to give up my job and write full time.
Halo says that's an amazing story, which it is, and so courageous. There's a few things that jump out at me there, and I mean, going back to when you were a young lady stepping into the world of writing for magazines, and taking that leap, that must have been quite a terrifying thing to do at that time.
It was
Especially, when your box which you put yourself in was a law box, and this was something completely kind of different.
And I mean, do you know what? Even at 18, you do listen to external forces. So at 18, you listen to your teachers who were like, you're great at the humanities subjects. Have you ever thought about law? It's a great degree. My parents were obviously thrilled, their child was doing a law degree. I was a qualified solicitor by, the age of 25. That was really, really hard to turn my back on, to be honest. And even though I did feel this very passionate calling, I think the lesson I learned from that was, yes, the safe choice was staying as a lawyer. And the truth was, I probably would have been quite a mediocre lawyer because my heart really wasn't in it. Whereas I went quite quickly through the ranks as a journalist because I was super passionate about it. So I think there's a lot of listening to your gut instinct, I think. And even if something feels scary, I would say manage the risk. So I made sure I qualified as a lawyer, and actually the job offer did dovetail with me qualifying. But I think had the job offer come, say, 2 months before qualification, I don't think I would have. Would I have taken it? Yes, I would have taken it, but I would have pleaded for them to, just let me qualify. Interested, and this is another nice story. About 18 months later, I was now working at More magazine, and we used to do loads of features that featured, young guys talking about relationships or whatever. And we did this feature called University Sex Challenge, and it was a battle of the sexes. Who knew more about the opposite sex, the girls or the boys? And literally 18 months in, I had drained all my contacts. Every male I knew had been in a More magazine feature. And so I had to sort of start asking outside my immediate friendship circle. And somebody said, oh, I know somebody who'll do it. He's called Jerry. He's like you. He was a lawyer, but he actually gave it up just before he qualified, and we went, and he was in our feet, and it was J.L.Butler, and I think that was probably his first interview as well. So maybe I'm a bit of a talent spotter here.
Yeah. I think we should turn this around to interview me. I might have a chance.
Well, this is, you are the new lead child.
It's interesting. I was thinking maybe if you had carried on the other path and become, practicing what you would learn.
Yeah.
If you had ended up writing a book anyway, and there's a lot of people that have been lawyers who've come on the show, and Tony Kent, for example, who are releasing their books towards the later stages of that career. So I wonder if it's always been embedded. Had you gone down that path, you may have ended up in the same way. I'm not sure.
I mean, it's a really good question, and one that I haven't even considered. Would I have done this anyway? And the answer probably is yes. I do think if you, again, you listen to what your instinct is telling you, I think, at the end of the day, when is it ever easy to write a book? That's the truth. It's hard work. And for me, as I said, I'd got married and I had a baby quite quickly. So I was actually writing this book while I was pregnant. In fact, the book was delivered the night before I went into hospital to have in. So I was literally, I think of me, and I can remember it. I finished it at about 2:00 in the morning, and the next day I was in hospital. So there's never a right time, and I think had I have been a 50-year-old, partner in a law firm, you've still got to at some point put your bum on a seat after a really long day at work and crank out the words. But I think if you have the idea and if you're passionate about it, I mean, I say the first book I ever wrote was Daddy's Girls. There was actually, I sort of did a bit of a trial run. So there was myself, my husband, and the writer Will Storr, who's now my brother-in-law. He's a very successful non-fiction writer, and we all sort of had this burning desire that we wanted to write books. And I remember we all went to a National Trust cottage for a week and started writing stuff. And whatever we wrote, it's never seen the light of day. And I started writing a chick lit novel, but my heart wasn't in it. And I think books do become easier to write, even if you do have a full-time job, if you've got the bit between your teeth about a story that you're just burning to tell.
Definitely. I think Del Parks, when she came on the show, one of my favorite comments about people having time, she had mentioned that someone had said they don't have the time to write, and she said when she was writing one of her books, she had a partner with multiple young children, and she was working full-time as a head of English, and basically that at that point, anyone could have easily just hung it up and gone, I'm not doing this. But it's making the time around the life you have and not making a life for that. So it's one of those things that you just got to get on with it when you can. And
even now, I mean, I was actually out with Adele on Sunday night because she's just got an MBE, which is very exciting. So we went out to celebrate. And we decided, though, she doesn't live that far away from me, but we said, you know what, maybe we should shift our brunches, because we have these, we call them the double brunch. And we get together and we generally chat about non-book stuff, actually, but then that's why we have the double brunch. We have one session and then we generally get kicked out. We have to go somewhere else. And that's when we do the book chat. But we said, actually, maybe the double brunches have got to become suppers now, because you still have to have that degree of discipline, I think, even if, it's a tough business. It's a great business. But increasingly, I started the whole being a writer 15 years ago now. And certainly since, certainly in the past 2 or 3 years, I think the expectations of what you've got to do is more. So you have to do more press. You have to keep on top of the social media as discussion, Twitter, etc. is almost a full-time job in itself if you do it properly. So, yeah, you've got to be really organized with your time.
Do you think that's a factor of the way things have evolved and that there's so much competition out there, as self-publishing is massive now as well? Do you think that's a factor of that, or is it just the way it is now, or are those influences a real part?
I think the bottom line is that writing a good book isn't enough anymore. I think, 10 years ago, perhaps you had more chance of breaking through with a great book, but there's such a lot of noise out there at the moment. And, you know, even say Richard and Judy, they used to be every 3 times a year. I think now they're every, you know, 6 or 7 times a year. It's a really, really noisy industry, and the rewards are still there. And things like self-publishing are fantastic because the gatekeepers have gone, and, you know, it feels like a very, very sort of liberating time for creatives, but it's also noisy.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the people who can sort of work social media and increase their profile, honestly, they stand a sort of a better chance of breaking through. Because I tell you what, I mean, even in-house in publishing firms, you have got to create buzz about yourself. So it is this, I always say it's a series of hoops. You've got to get through the agent, then you've got to get in with the publishing house. And then even once you've got a publisher, there's still competition in-house to be the lead title, the super lead or whatever. And I think if you are a noisy person, somebody that can generate a lot of heat about yourself, you're probably more likely to be taken seriously, to be honest, and pushed.
Yeah, it's like being on the X Factor these days, isn't it? You really have to have the whole package.
You do, yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's plenty of tips people can pick up from that. So, you know, thanks for all those tips in there, because people will be enjoying that comment. Okay, we're going to get into part 2 of the show, which is about your current story, which I believe was the last step out. Was that out in January this year?
Well, I've got 2. Do you know what? I actually had 2 out on the same day. So, yeah, so there's this one. I will, ta-da! So that's my J.L.Butler,
Yeah.
which was, so again, rewind, another fun story for you. About 10 or, it must be about 9 or 10 years ago, actually, I got a phone call from my agent to say, would you be interested in ghostwriting? And do you know what? It was something I'd never even considered, but they're like, oh, it's quite a juicy one, this one. So I was like, okay, what is it? It was Donald Trump. And he was the Apprentice guy at the time. Nobody knew he was going to get into politics. Would you be interested? I remember the time thinking, oh, do you know what? It'd be quite fun to go to Mar-a-Lago or whatever it was called. So I said yes, didn't get the gig, forgot all about it. And then 6 months later, got another phone call. It didn't work out with Donald's first ghostwriter. Would you be interested? And in the meanwhile, I'd had a book called Kiss Heaven Goodbye out. It's quite a big hit. And the opening paragraph was a billionaire in a Trump Towers type situation. Anyway, I'd got back on his radar and they wanted me to do it. And to cut a very long story short, clearly I'd never read Art of the Deal, because we got into negotiations about the money. And perhaps again, my instinct was sort of telling me perhaps you shouldn't do this. Anyway, we couldn't agree on a deal, and so I walked away and the deal fell apart. And actually that trilogy of books never happened. Perhaps politics would have taken a different turn had he become a best-selling writer. Who knows? Anyway,
Wow.
at least, you know, but at least sometimes when an opportunity like that comes on your radar, you start to question your working life. So I started thinking to myself, can I write more than 1 book a year here? And the answer was, well, if you, again, back to the organization, if you are disciplined and if you organize your time, perhaps. So I started writing another book. I wrote another book called The Proposal, which is one of my favorite books I've ever written. It's more of a romance. I loved writing that book. And then I also started, so once that had been filed, I started writing a thriller. And it didn't even have a name. It was just called Thriller. And it was sitting on my desktop, staring at, like, taunting me every day. And every now and then I'd do, you know, bits and bobs on Thriller. And then it must have been about 3 or 4 years ago, I was sick of looking at Thriller on my desktop. And I'd written about 35,000 words by this point. And I just said to my agent, I said, do you know what? It's London Book Fair's coming up. Can you just take Thriller to the fair and see if you can sell it? And she's like, yeah, but Thriller isn't really done. Thriller hasn't even got a name. And, you know, it was almost called Thriller, like the Michael Jackson thing. Anyway, it was a funny one, that one, because she went, and I remember going, do you know what? I think I'm going to go down to London Book Fair myself. So off I went down to London Book Fair, and a bird pooped on my dress. I remember. And I was just like thinking, oh no, this is a disaster. I can't go to London Book Fair. But I remember my husband was with me. He's like, isn't that good luck? If a bird poops on your clothes, I was like, it doesn't feel very lucky. So I had to run to Marks and Spencer's. I bought a top, went back to London Book Fair. And literally that morning, while all this was happening, my agent had bumped into a scout from 20th Century Fox and told him about Thriller, which was called Mine by this point. And he was like, wow, that sounds really good. And he ended up, so he wanted to have a copy of it. And he told his friend about it, who's another scout. And this lady actually discovered Girl on the Train. And so she read it on the way back to New York when she was flying back after the fair and really liked it. And then by the end of the week, I had the film deal, the option,
Wow.
the option from Sony Pictures, and it was like, it's quite weird. So Thriller actually got the film option before it got a book deal. So obviously off the back of that, it was a lot easier to then get a publishing deal, which brings us in a very long-winded way to Unfaithful by J.L.Butler. So J.L.Butler is basically my Thriller thing, and people say, why did you do another name? Why did you do another name? And that's a very boring story. That was just a contractual issue, really. So I was with Headline at the time, and I really wasn't supposed to. And basically, the book had gone to HarperCollins, and it was all a little bit contractually messy. So the way we got around that was by doing it under a pen name. So that's what happened, and that was supposed to come out last year. And it got put back because of all the COVID sort of bottlenecking that was happening. And it came out on the same day as my Tasmina Last Supper. So rewind on that story. So my career sort of slightly diversified over the past year. So my best friend is an author called Bella Andre, who is a super successful indie published author. I think she's one of Amazon's top, biggest ever selling indie authors. And she's been telling me for years, now you've got this double thing going on, why don't you try and release some Tasminas yourself? And that really appealed to me because, I think once a lawyer, always a lawyer, in a way. And there's definitely a commercial side to me. And I've been a magazine editor as well. And I just had all this experience from that life that I felt I could use doing my own stuff. And then I thought, well, maybe be ambitious about this. So actually over lockdown, while lots of people were sort of making banana bread, I was literally setting up my own little imprint. And so I'm doing the Tasmina books through that. So my friend Bella Andre has sort of been holding my hand on the way. I've got another author, an Irish author called Maggie Finn, and I'm just having a brilliant time, actually. So I've got the traditional thing going on. And will I ever do traditional Tasmina Perries? Possibly. But the fact is I can write quite quickly. And the fact that I used to work on Heat magazine, and that was a weekly. The More magazine was a fortnightly. So I'm used to writing a lot of words in a week. And increasingly with traditional published authors, what always used to frustrate me was the fact that you had a slot. And so you're the summer read or you're the Christmas read. And it's like, well, actually, if you can write 2 books a year, which actually meant, I had to go with 2 publishers eventually to do that. Why? Because if your readers are voracious and if your readers want more, why can't we give them more?
Yeah.
And so doing my own little imprint has been incredibly liberating for that, actually. And The Last Supper is actually it's a series, and my editors have always been slightly resistant to series because I think the series are quite hard if you don't write police procedurals. Whereas this idea was an investigative journalist, and there's a love interest, so it's sort of romance, suspense, women's fiction. and I'm not sure I would have been allowed to have done it traditionally. I mean, maybe I'm doing them a disservice. Maybe I would have been, but I certainly wouldn't have been able to write 2 in a year. So it's been fantastic. So I've worked my ass off basically throughout lockdown, and I literally had to take myself off to a little Champneys health spa trip last week because I was flipping exhausted. I went to get my green tea actually, and I turned around and I saw Helena Bonham Carter, so that was quite fun.
Oh,
I almost said to her, "Do you want to be in a thriller called Unfaithful?" But then I thought, no, the poor woman's relaxing at the spa like me, so I won't bother her with my
wow.
requests.
The amount of people you bump into is amazing. Yeah, I mean, having your book option before it's even sold is incredible. And now looking back at it, when you know, with all these connections and people you bump into, I mean, is J.L.Butler has he got a cameo in there?
Do you know what? I mean, we are laughing about this, bumping into people. One thing I'd say to anybody is always be open. Be friendly, be open, always get chatting. Even if you sort of err on the introverted side, I would always say people are generally happy to help, generally happy to have a chat. And I actually met a guy at my son's school, and he was just there, and he gave a speech, and he was an actor actually. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to be really cheesy going up to him. But I thought his speech was great that he just gave. So I just went up to him and congratulated him. We got chatting. That's when I found out he was an actor. And by the world's smallest coincidence, he's a friend of Gerard Butler's. But the truth is, the whole thing could come full circle. And Gerard Butler actually would be amazing as the husband. So if Gerard Butler, if you are listening, there's a role waiting for you.
I mean,
we joke, but be open. That would be the big advice that I give.
I mean, I got to be honest, I don't think he watches the show, but if he does, hello,
know.
and
you
Tasmina.
You literally never know.
Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing? Right, so I didn't play the next video, so if you like the first one, I'll play this one, which is about the story. So once I played this, let the audience know what The Last Supper is all about.
Okay.
So then, The Last Supper came out in January, if that was correct. Let the audience know what that's all about. And
so, as discussed, one of the reasons I wanted to basically publish the Tasmina series myself, because The Last Supper is book 2 in a series, was because I know, and this was actually my friend Bella Andre that told me this. That she's a really smart lady. She's got a degree, economics degree from Stanford University. Literally sat down and looked at the whole market, and this is when she realized that series are brilliant and noticed that lots of books pop on book 5. I think Nora Roberts popped on book 5. Lee Child, I mean, he was always successful, but he really popped on book 5. And all these book series franchises kept popping several books in. And often her view was that in the traditional world, sometimes you're not allowed to get to 5 books in a series. If it's not working, nix.
Yeah.
So I wanted to write a series quite quickly. So the first book in the series, so the main character is called Lara Stone, and she is an investigative journalist who works for something like The Mail, and she's actually rich. Her family own the company basically, but she drives a motorbike. She's cool. She hides her money. She's a real sort of kick-ass heroine. I've loved writing her actually. And the thing I really wanted to write about actually was the dwindling place of journalism in the world, and how lots of reporters are not actually allowed the breathing space to investigate stories anymore. So places like The Guardian will still devote a lot of resources to it. But generally, back in the day, even 10 years ago, an investigative team could go off and do an amazing report and spend 3 to 6 months doing it. Those days are kind of gone now. And investigative teams increasingly are getting folded into the news team. So I just kind of wanted to write one of these stories, almost like, do you remember like 70s paranoid thrillers, like, 3 Days of Condor with Robert Redford, or, All the President's Men, those very sort of quite sexy, quite stylish thrillers that feature journalists. Because if you don't want to write with a detective as your main investigating hero, where do you go with that? Now, you could sort of go down the Poirot, Miss Marple road, but I thought, I know I am a journalist. I know loads of journalists. Why don't you make that character your sort of central character? So the first book in the series, which came out in the summer, was called The Yacht Party, and that was sort of investigating like a sort of a Jeffrey Epstein type case. This one is much more of a sort of a locked room mystery, because one thing, and I'm sure all the writers out there will appreciate this, if you love your world you're writing about, you're halfway there. And I really I always write about exotic locations, but I'd kind of done lots of the obvious ones like New York and Monaco, and I thought, where would be really exciting to write about? And I was also quite keen on writing about the food world as well, because not just because I like eating, but because I think the whole world of chefs and the ego and status was something really exciting as well. So the book, The Last Supper, is actually set at a sort of very chic, very exclusive farm to table restaurant. And it's being manned. The head chef is a very sort of a Viking warrior type cook. And he basically gets murdered. So Lara Stone, our journalist, with her sort of on-off love interest, because there is a sort of an on-off. I used to love moonlighting as a teenager. Do you remember that? I love those will they, won't they sort of relationships. So they go to the last supper of the season, and the chef is found dead. And so there's a touch of, I mean, I love all those Murder on the Orient Express. I can't wait for Death on the Nile. I really wanted to write a sort of a glossy, sexy, not quite a locked room mystery, but when I think a really useful exercise, I actually did it today at the strategy meeting I had, was sort of, who are you? And I think writers often have to ask themselves that question. What books do you write? Who are you? Why should people come to you? And I think when I sort of try to deconstruct my books and what I do, it's probably glamorous mysteries with a sort of a romance element. And so that's what The Last Supper really is. It's sort of it's a mystery set in somewhere glamorous, and there's a bit of a love thing going on, and somebody gets killed, and it's set over Christmas. And yeah, I really love writing it, set in northern Sweden.
Sounds absolutely fantastic. There's a question for you then, with all that you've just said. If someone wants to write something, they may be new into this process, but they're really kind of passionate about the subject like you are. What tip would you have for them to get off the ground and get themselves diving into that?
First of all, I would research. That's the big one, because often you can be stuck for a story. I started looking into, when you start off sort of doing a murder mystery type thing, you have to think about, how does the person get killed?
Yeah.
And when I did research into basically restaurants and doing the whole farm to table thing in hostile conditions, whether it's the Pacific Northwest, where they get really cold winters, or whether it's in Russia, or whether it's in Lapland, I discovered that they had these things called root cellars. And the root cellars are where you basically grow as much produce as you can in the summer, when the ground is basically suitable for it. But in the winter, when everything's frozen over, it all goes into these root cellars. And I thought, wow, that's a really atmospheric setting. And so, the murder does happen. I'm not giving anything away here because it happens at the beginning, but the murder happens in a root cellar. So I'd say, think about the world and then do a deep dive on the world. I would say people are always happy to talk to you. I talked to a few chefs. People love talking about themselves at the end of the day. So you'd be surprised at the sort of information you can get. And I think when, you do really look into your subject matter a bit more or visit the place. I mean, I always suggest visiting places. Often the story starts to write itself.
Amazing. Anna says she had a root cellar in one house. I've
Oh,
never heard of that. That's
no, I
very
haven't
interesting.
before. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we've got just under 15 minutes left. So what we're going to do, part 3 is community questions, guys. That means if you're watching this right now, you can type some questions in for Tasmina or myself or for both of us. And while you're typing those, I will ask a few stable questions. So start sending them in, please. In fact, whilst you're typing those questions up, guys, before you send them in, I'm going to ask, I've got not a game per se, but a little thing, detective mystery of your own to do, Tasmina. So I need you to guess the book based on a statement and see if you can guess. It is multiple choice, so I've made it easy.
Yeah.
A short creature with hairy feet is roped into an adventure by a mischievous wizard. Would that be The Hunger Games, The Hobbit, The Fault in Our Stars, or 50 Shades of Grey?
Well, it's The Hobbit, isn't it? You know, I did read The Hunger. Well, I hope it's not The Hunger Games because I read it recently and I don't remember any small creature with big feet. So,
Not 50 Shades?
not 50 Shades. I mean, I haven't really read 50 Shades, actually. I read the first few chapters and put it down, and I missed the craze. So,
Yeah.
I'm going for The Hobbit.
You were correct in The Hobbit there.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay, the next one. Can I put that? Yeah, I can put that up. A rich man hires a goth punk hacker and hardened journalist to solve his niece's long ago disappearance. Is that The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Macbeth, Gone Girl, or The Stranger?
It's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Again, set in northern Sweden. So I did actually watch that while I was writing my book. You know, just to, you know, we talked earlier on about music. I think sometimes it's great to almost compile a soundtrack. So I don't tend to listen to music, but to get into the mood, occasionally I will listen to something. I'm sort of quite a visual person, and I love watching lots of movies that are in the ballpark and sort of, you know, trying to imagine, say, Daniel Craig being, you know, one of the guests at the Last Supper type thing. Yeah, so it's Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good idea. Okay, so there you go. Noisy. If you could take the character from the world of fiction, whether that be film, TV, literature of any sort, and put them into maybe one of your stories or into a new story, what character would you take and why?
When I think about my favourite characters from literature, I absolutely love Cassandra from I Captured the Castle, which is my favourite book, and I actually really love those sort of quite forthright young adults that are almost on the cusp of adulthood, and I find their bluntness really funny and smart, and it's the same reason why I love Bryony, you know, in Atonement. It's sort of those quite slightly prickly, very smart female narrators. I think Cassandra is a brilliant narrator. I'd love her to be in. Actually, when I wrote The Proposal, which was probably the most different book I've ever written, it was a historical, and it was set in 1958, which was the last year of the debutante. So The Proposal is actually about the last debutante season. And I always used to sort of really channel Cassandra in my head as I wrote that. So yeah, it is a really good tip of taking characters or people who played that character in film and sort of trying to weave them into your story.
Yeah, I really liked when you said that you kind of watched the films rough genre related
Yeah.
to get into the mindset.
Yeah.
I've never thought of that, and that's a really good tip for people. Thank you for that one. That's great. Okay, if you could change the ending to anything, again, TV, film, or book, what ending would you change? And it doesn't have to be because it was terrible. It can be for good reason, I guess. What ending would you change?
These are quite. Is it books or films as well?
Films as well. Whichever you want to pick.
Do you know what? I've got a book bubbling that I probably won't get written for this year, but it's going to be next year. And I love road trip books, really love road trip books. And so again, back to talking about watching films to inspire what you do. I just put into Google road trip movies to see what was out there. And, you know, a lot of the obvious ones came up, like, you know, The Sure Thing and French Kiss and all the sorts of romantic comedies. And one came up, which is a lesser known Ben Affleck, Sandra Bullock movie called Forces of Nature. And it's a road trip movie. And it's a guy who is on his way to his own wedding and meets Sandra Bullock, who is the polar opposite to him. And they go on this journey and loads of things go wrong. And you probably won't watch this movie, so I'll tell you what happens.
Yeah, I won't watch this.
I'll tell you what happens. Basically, at the end, there's a mass, and it's called Forces of Nature because the sort of weather's against them. And of course, bad weather is often just a ploy, a device to stretch out the fact that they're not getting to their destination. And once Ben Affleck gets to his destination, the reader is, or the viewer is so invested in their relationship, you want them to be together. And he doesn't. He ends up seeing his bride and sort of going, oh, I do love you after all. And I think and I felt cheated, and I enjoyed the film and I love watching their chemistry, but I felt cheated. And I think this is something that writers have got to be really careful about. Don't fall into cliches, but actually when you're writing something, whether it's a script or a film, you make a promise to the reader, and the reader has expectations. And with Forces of Nature, you'd really invested in their journey, their spiritual journey, their romantic journey, their actual journey. And then for him to turn his back on Sandra Bullock, basically, and go, oh, well, I wanted to be with my fiance anyway. I felt cheated of the promise that had been made to me.
That's very, very interesting. That
Yeah.
really is amazing. Okay. One more for me, and then I'll get some questions from the community because the time is flying by. I love this. Okay. What does literary success look like for you? It's kind of a deep question.
It's very deep. It's very deep. What does literary success mean? Now, right at the beginning of my career, I sort of had a top 10 bestseller really quickly out the gates, and I will forever be thankful for that. And that is one yardstick of success, I suppose. And, you know, the film deal was fantastically exciting, although, you know, 3 years down the line, Ben Affleck still hasn't signed on. So, of course, you know, that's an ongoing journey. But really, at the end of the day, to me, the success is making a career out of this and looking back and thinking of me behind a desk in a lawyer's office, really unhappy. And whenever I feel a bit stressed by a deadline, or maybe a book isn't as successful as I'd have hoped, I just kind of think, well, what was the alternative really? And I made some brave choices to do what I do. And I never regret doing them, because for me, literary success has been, I filed that first book the day before my son was born. Well, 2 days as it turned out, because it was a very long labour. And I've been able to work from home and do the pickups and go and spend 2 months in Australia writing. And, you know, literally I have written up tree houses, and I have written, you know, all the sort of things that don't necessarily cost a lot of money, but they cost time and they cost imagination, which is what writers have. And so to me, that's the joy really, is being able to do this. And you know, I tell this to everybody that, you know, it's a really, I mean, I've noticed that a lot of book deals are coming down at the moment. I think the bigger man's money is still there for debut authors, but for a lot of authors, advances are definitely being cut post-COVID. But it's like, actually, it doesn't matter anymore, because there's so many other alternatives, you know, whether you start your own imprint, whether you know, you just purely doing the self-publishing thing, whether you're hybrid, whether you're traditional, whether you do non-fiction books, whether you just do podcasts or audio. There's so many ways right now to bring your words, content, stories to life that it's a really, really exciting time.
Fantastic answer. Okay, some questions from you guys before we wrap up. A couple of minutes left. Still in the movie world there. Anya says, what is the most ridiculous movie you've seen?
Oh, it's a hard question because there's lots of ridiculous movies.
There's tons of them.
Can I come back to that
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
I'll tell you what is, I mean, it's not ridiculous, but what I'm not enjoying is Emily in Paris at the moment.
Right.
And I loved series one. So it's not a movie, it's a TV show, but it's becoming increasingly ridiculous. And it's just relying on ridiculous outfits. And what they've forgotten, I think, in series 2 is the storytelling. And it's become so thin, and they're just relying on outlandish costumes. And I think once you forget story and what people are there for, which is an investment in the characters, I think you're lost, to be honest.
Do you know what? I really feel that TV and movies, especially when it comes to writing a novel, you have to be so on the point. Whereas when it comes to TV and film, they often jump through, ignore loopholes, plot holes quite obviously. And I think it's just accepted in culture, which is weird because you should be offered the actual story to work properly.
Well, for sure. And it's like you'd expect, there's lots of things that, I'm sure people are thinking of now as we talk about this, really just massive glaring plot holes. And you think, actually, if I sent this to my editor, I would wholly expect it to come back. It's not good enough. It's back to the promise we were talking about before, is you owe it to your readers who are paying money for your stuff that you've thought about it all and, you make it work.
Definitely. Joanne says, is J.L.Butler as funny, smart, and as handsome in real life or as in person?
Well, I mean, it was like 23 years ago, but I have to say he was swoony. He was great.
Of course he was, Joe.
Of course he was. And Joe, I have to say, we talked before about, I sort of managed my risk becoming a writer by qualifying, and Jerry didn't. But I could tell from the moment I met him that he was super ambitious and was, just had that charm and had that hustle that would get him places. So, do you know what? If you've got that sort of personality, I would just say go for it, because you almost don't need any risk because you'll land on your feet.
Fantastic. We'll have one more before we wrap this up. And Joanna Reese on Facebook. It's a big old question there. I love Tammy's books, and she's been an inspiration to me over the years. She has been so prolific over the last year. I wanted to share her tips for writing fast. Does she start at the beginning of the story every time, or just go from where she left off each day? We'll answer that one.
Do you know what? I just try and get that first draft down as quickly as possible. And sometimes it's not, I don't do it chronologically. If the end chapter comes to me, sometimes actually, I mean, certainly back to the proposal, that last chapter came to me literally fully formed, even fairly soon after and I wrote that quite early on. And I'm quite a visual writer, so when I think of a scene, I could sort of have it playing as a little TV movie or movie in my head. If I see the scene, I'll write it. So, we were talking about the root cellar before. Once I found out what a root cellar was and knew that these things existed, I thought, wow, that's a great place to have the murder. And so I wrote the scene again quite early on of him walking to the root cellar and meeting, we don't know who it is. So I'd just say get that messy first draft down and don't try and think about it too much. I mean, I know I've got some writer friends who write, beautiful prose, but they take a really long time doing it, and they really think about every word, every sentence, and it's lyrical. But for me, it's about plot, it's about story, and I just get that down first and then sort of layer on the characterization.
That is another fantastic answer. Guys, we have hit our hour mark, which is absolutely flown by. So we have to end the show. Guys, thank you in the chat for your comments and for your support. It's been absolutely wonderful. Tasmina, thank you so much for joining me. I've absolutely loved this interview, and so many stories, so much knowledge coming our way. Absolutely loved it. Where can they find your books? And again, when the website, guys, please go and check that out. It's full of really good things that you will enjoy.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, Unfaithful by J.L.Butler is in the supermarkets and Waterstones, and you can get my Tasmina through Amazon. So I'd be thrilled if you could have a look, and happy writing, everyone.
Fantastic. Guys, please stay safe. COVID's still lingering around out there, so look after yourselves, and I will see you next week. From me, from Tasmina, we are saying goodbye. See you soon.